whatever you're trying to do, one of the golden rules of all that is that if you get negative about it, you lose. Like, you can't get negative about stuff.
Welcome to another episode of Contrabass Conversations, your show covering life on the low end of the spectrum. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and I really appreciate you tuning in. Visit our site at contrabassconversations.com for all the details about what we're doing here. And I love hearing people's stories, and I would love it if you reached out and told me your story. And you can do that by emailing me at feedback@contrabassconversations.com. This week, we're doing something a little different for the podcast. We're sharing stories about 5 musicians who didn't wait for the music world to offer them opportunities. Instead, they went out and created their own opportunities. And I know you're going to love today's story about Emilio Guarino. Now, Emilio is the author of Make It, which he describes as the book I wish they gave me with my diploma. And it's full of great advice, actionable advice you can act on right now to establish yourself as a musician. And we talk about a bunch of other topics, including the Lucerne Festival, mindset, self-awareness, Emilio's favorite books, the 7 deadly sins people make with websites, that's great, and many other topics. And we'll be playing some excerpts of Emilio performing music by Edgar Meyer, Dave Anderson, and Heinz Hollander, plus some of his electronic music composition as well. And if you'd like to check out the video version of this interview, we've got it posted at contrabassconversations.com/Emilio Guarino. And I know you're going to love this conversation. It was such fun. And please check him out on his website, emilioguarino.com. Let everybody know about your early musical years. What'd you start on? Where'd you grow up? That kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. So basically, to kick it off here, I played music from a young age. Like, my first music lessons were in about, like, let's say 3rd or 4th grade. My first instrument was the trumpet. I'm not entirely sure why I picked that one, but it was one of those things, like, I knew that I always loved music. Like, my first birthday gift that I was ever super, like, freaking out about was I got a Walkman, like a tape player. So here's my moment of starting to feel old, right?
Right, yeah, exactly.
You kids don't know what that... No, I'm kidding. I'm still a young guy. But yeah, so I got this tape player, and I found a couple radio stations that I loved. I was, like, obsessed with it. That was my favorite thing as a kid that I had. And so then I started playing trumpet in the public school system. Wasn't really much of a trumpet player. Then I think I did that for like 2 years, and then the final nail in that coffin was I got braces. Playing trumpet was just like, oh God, it was really rough. But around the same time, we're maybe in middle school now, I started getting guitar lessons. Like, we just had a guitar in the house. My mom saw me playing around with it. So she said, oh, maybe, like, do you want to get a lesson or two? Like, learn how to play some tunes? So we did that, and I took to that one, like a fish to water. That was something I really loved doing. And then it was reinforced at school, because when the kids at school who would make fun of me found out I could play some guitar, it totally turned it around, right? Yeah. So I was like, wait. So I like this, and it makes people think I'm cool. Like, this is beautiful. So I really like music, and it really helped me kind of find my identity as a person. And it was the first thing where I really felt like, okay, this is like part of who I am. This is what I do. So I'm playing guitar through high school. When I got to high school, I decided I wanted to be in the marching band and the jazz band, because they were both really good. Mm-hmm. And at that point, I was just like, well, I want to just get into whatever good musical opportunity comes my way, whatever that is. And so those 2 groups weren't looking for guitar players. So I was like, okay, let me just learn whatever I have to learn to get into this thing, because they sound really good. I want to do it. So first, that was percussion. They always needed people for the marching band. And I said, okay, if I'm going to do marching band, let me do percussion, because that'll help me work on my time. I was really bad at playing with a metronome. My teachers loved to tell me that. So I was like, okay, like, this will be a good way to whip myself into shape. So that's what I did. I got pretty decent at it after a couple years. Like, my freshman, sophomore year was a little rough, but I did it. And then, typical bass player story, the jazz band, I couldn't get into that one right away. on percussion because I wasn't good enough at drum set yet. But they always needed a bass player, right? So I said, "Oh, I play some guitar. It's the same notes in the bottom four string. Cool, okay, right?" So I got in. I started playing electric bass, and then my senior year, the school didn't have an orchestra at all. They just had they had a marching band, they had a jazz band, and they had a concert band. And for whatever reason, they happened to have one double bass just in a closet somewhere. And my teachers found me playing around with it because I was doing the electric bass thing, and then they encouraged me a little bit. I think one of them they found a bow and some rosin for me so I could make all kinds of horrible noises. Had no idea how that worked, but yeah. So they got me going. They got me set up with it. The bass was in bad shape, so they got a repairman to come in and fix it up since the kid was actually interested in playing the thing. So I played that my senior year, and then when it came time to go off to college, I was really interested in going to music school because there were a couple people, early influences, who were doing music professionally who went to my high school, and I was made aware of them, and I had always loved music so much, and I had an aptitude for it, so I was like, this makes sense. I think I can do this. Family was very opposed, didn't want me to do it. I think either my blog or my book, I forget where, I knew they were wrong because there were people from my high school who I saw were out on tour and doing it, and I was like, okay, so family, they have my best wishes in mind, but they just don't know, what's up with this because there's no real musicians or artists in the family. It's a lot of science people, that's cool too for other reasons. But so anyway, somehow I went into college as a non-major. I was undeclared my first year because my folks were like, just try to find anything that's not there. So I was like, okay, family, I'll take your advice. So I did that for a semester and said, okay, music time. I was, I took some other courses. I really tried to find something else. And at the end of the day, that was the thing that I kept coming back to. Somehow I got into a very respectable conservatory with not much technical ability on the instrument. I had a couple lessons on bass at that point. My first real teacher was this guy named John Lennis, who's mostly a jazz player, but he studied classically. He plays around New Jersey. He was the first guy at the time. He was a grad student up at William Patterson, which is a phenomenal jazz program. But that's how one of these guys who I saw that was doing the music thing, who is a couple years older than me, was one of the people I reached out to who put me in touch with John. Okay. And got me set up with my first lessons, right? John gave me a couple lessons. I got into Mason Gross School of the Arts, which is at Rutgers University, also in Jersey. And I wasn't good. I couldn't do much technically. I had big gaps in my knowledge. But I think the reason that they ended up taking me was in that year where I was a non-major, I did a jazz combo. Okay. I showed up every week, totally got my butt kicked. It was just always a mess, but no matter how bad it got, I just hung in there and kept showing up. So the faculty member was like, okay, this, thinking about it from their perspective now, they probably were thinking this kid isn't good, but he keeps showing up and he's got energy, so if there's any reason that's the one redeeming quality I think I had. But yeah, so anyway, make a long story short, I get in at Rutgers, start studying with this guy, Mike Richmond, who was a fantastic teacher for me because he, an incredible jazz player, tremendous guy. He's had a big international career. He also studied with Edward Arian from the Philadelphia Orchestra back when he was at Temple. And so he has really rigorous classical training. And he was the guy who opened me up a lot. And he said, oh, no, you can't just do doing jazz music is great, but you have to do different things too. You have to play in the orchestra, you have to play some solos, go do weird free improv with the new music guy. Just get your feet wet in everything. Because his story, he thought he was going to be an orchestral guy. And then the jazz thing took off, which he'd never expected to happen. And that ended up being, this big career. So his takeaway for me was that you don't know where things are going to start to go your way. So just be versatile, try to be good at a lot of things and be flexible, and then just go where opportunity takes you. And, a lot of my other teachers have said the same thing. After I finished up at Rutgers, Well, I started studying with Linda McKnight, who I'm sure you know about.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
She's probably taught like an absurd percentage of the people who've been on your podcast.
Right. Yes, definitely.
Amazing teacher. But I started studying with her while I was still at Rutgers. So I was getting lessons with Mike, finishing up my program. And then I would drive up to her house in North Jersey. And once a week, I'd get a lesson with her, and we would do some Andal stuff and, etudes and the Zimmerman Boeing book and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, sure.
So she really helped get my bow arm in shape and get me up to speed there. And then the last leg of the educational journey really was I went up to the Hart School and did a master's degree with Robert Black. He's another guy, different kind of teacher. He's like a new music guy, but he can do all kinds of stuff. Like you hear him play excerpts and standard rep, and like he sounds really good on all that stuff, even though he's known more for his like contemporary recordings like Valentine and like Znakis and that kind of stuff. Yeah, but he was another guy who just emphasized like being well-rounded as a player, being able to do lots of different stuff and putting yourself out there. And that's basically like my formal education summed up.
No, it's great. Well, and studying with people like Linda McKnight and Robert Black, what a great foundation. And then Robert, he's a great example of being able to work in all these different kinds of styles. And I just think of him, I know him from the ISB board, and just a very, very open-minded, creative musician. That's cool. And I love what you said. You were undecided and then getting into the music school, and you showed up. And you every day, and that's something that you touch on in your book a lot, which I think is very cool. But I want to ask you a little bit about it. It seems like the Lucerne Festival Academy was a big point in your life. Can you just talk a little bit about that, like getting into that and what that whole program's like? I don't think I've known about the program for years, but I don't think I've ever had anyone on the show that's done it.
Yeah, Lucerne?
Yeah.
That was a whole other thing. That was amazing. So I didn't know about that festival until I got to Hart in my master's. It didn't come up for whatever reason. But once I got to Hart, I was put in touch with a couple people who had gone. Yeah, I guess over the years, Robert has sent a decent number of students over there. Just, guys who are freelancing now, doing well. And Lucerne, what can I say about Lucerne first? Well, it came on my radar at Hart, and I decided that I wanted to try to go. After I finished school, my master's, I should say, I knew I didn't want to go back to school again for my doctorate or a diploma or anything. I didn't think I would get as much out of that, but I knew I wanted to keep studying with people and learning. So I said, okay, I'm going to just get lessons with different people. So there was a couple different teachers that I worked with after I got out of school. And then I said, I'm going to try to do a summer festival, at least the next, couple of years, to keep learning, but more on my own terms, not when I'm like forced through the academic grinder. Yeah, I put in applications for a few different festivals, and Lucerne was kind of like the Hail Mary pass, right? I didn't think I was going to get in. I was really like, this is like a big deal thing. And like, what I just did what everybody else does. I got lessons with people that I respect and trust and had them coach me up on stuff. I made the best audition tape I could. I sent it in and I got in. The festival itself is really wonderful because it's well funded. So they pay for your travel expenses and they put you up while you're over there. And the collaborators are top notch, right? Like, you get to work with some of the best people in the world. Like the first concert I played there, Simon Rattle was conducting. Like, what? Like, oh my God, right? So as like me, I'm just like I don't think of myself as like a big deal by any means. I'm just like a bass player, doing my thing, like just trying to live the dream, like. So I fell into that and I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. And he was just like one of several huge people like in the music stratosphere that I got to play with. And then what happened while I was there is they have this young performance program, which basically it was children's shows at the end of the day, right? They plan a tour where you go and play for kids. But the way it comes together is they get a composer that they commission to write a new piece with. They put it together with a choreographer, and they make a production out of it. And the performers that they use are selected from the alumni base of the academy at Lucerne, right? So I was there. They said, "Hey, there's this audition. Like it's for this thing. It's an opportunity. It pays a little money. It's like a good thing to do." So I went to a meeting where the composer was there, and they gave like a PowerPoint about what the project was and what would be happening. They said, "Okay, here's when the audition is." I showed up, I played, and then forgot about it. And then I got an email like 2 months later saying that, "Hey, you're in." and then it led to like, yeah. And then I was, and this project wrapped up, what was it? Maybe in May of this year. So yeah, we went and we had a work period where we worked with the composer in Lucerne and with the ensemble, got everybody together. Then I went back again for the premiere. And then this past spring is when all the tour dates were. And we just toured around Switzerland, and and we played this production that we put together called Fencidence. The composer we were working with was Todd Mackover from the MIT Media Lab. So again, like amazing people that I would have never been able to work with if I was just, I shouldn't say never, but it definitely accelerated things. That's one thing I talk about in the book, is sometimes like college and these summer programs and things, they're kind of like stepping on the gas pedal for what you're trying to do, which is why they can be beneficial. So anyway, yeah, that was just partially luck. Some of it was hard work. I had to work hard to get through the audition and do something that was acceptable to them. And the Fencidence audition was one of those things that it totally didn't fit the mold of what everyone told me success would come in. Like, if you told me that the big moneymaker for 2015 and 16 was going to be based off of a free improv audition, I would have laughed in your face, but that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
So that was one of those experiences that opened me up a little bit to what's out there, and how, like, not to hate on music schools too much. Obviously, I owe a lot to them, but one of the critiques I have of them is that they present like a successful career as only being a couple different shapes. And something like that it's one of a few experiences where I'm like, no, this can happen in a lot of different ways. It's not just you're going to be an orchestral player or a major international soloist or like some kind of jazz guy. Like, there's just a lot of ways it could go. So yeah, the Lucerne Festival is another one that I owe a lot to. The academy itself is really wonderful in terms of the instruction you get, the people you get to work with, the concerts that you play, but it also led to some really eye-opening opportunities. And then the final thing I should say about them is they're one of the few summer festivals I know of that really works hard to do something with their alumni. They're really, really interested in alumni projects. Another thing I did in the spring is they had this memorial concert for Pierre Boulez. And they flew in a whole orchestra of alumni going back to the first academy, right? The first summer that they put it together. They flew in all these people from like what is it? It's like a little over 10 years. I think it's been running now. They put together a whole orchestra to play this memorial concert for Boulez that, they did it just because they said, well, we have all these alumni. A lot of them are in good places in their careers and all that. Let's bring them back. Let's do it. So not many festivals that I know of are that proactive in terms of engaging their alumni community.
Yeah, no kidding. Not many festivals, and not even necessarily that many schools, aside from the bi-monthly alumni journal. I get my Northwestern journal, and I see it. But no, that's really cool that Lucerne does that.
It's a really special festival in that regard.
The presentation of career paths, that's like a big theme for me too. And so I read your book, and I think I emailed you this, but it reminded me, it actually is not very much like this book at all, but there's this book that I read when I was in high school called Making Money, Making Music, No Matter Where You Live. And the whole premise of the book was like, everybody should form a bar band and play bar gigs. And that's it. That's the way to do it. Forget you have some other ambition. Nope. It's all about the cover band. And I just remember like all the advice. It's like, grow your hair this certain way. Like, it was very like late 80s, early 90s rock bar band advice. It's all hilarious. Which your book is nothing like that at all. But that book actually like really connected with me when I was young. And I think what it did was it showed me, it was all about like all the different ways that people can look at the world of music and find a niche for themselves. And so maybe let's just start by what inspired you to write this book? When did that idea come about? What were the circumstances behind that?
It was the thinking that led me to actually do it. It was like 100 or a couple hundred little pushes from people.
Yeah, sure.
Basically. So it's because at the end of the day, I'm sitting here like, I'm a young guy. I still have a long way to go. I still have a lot to learn and figure out. Like, so I don't walk around thinking like, oh man, I know so much about this, and I'm like the authority. No, I'm not like the end all be all authority on this stuff. Definitely not. And that's one thing I try to emphasize is like, if you find my book and you get something out of it, awesome. But that should be like one of like 30 books you should read. You know, I'm just a piece of the puzzle. But the reason I decided to do it, especially at such a young age, is I took a step back and just started thinking about it. And I said, well, I'm doing something that a lot of people want to do but can't figure out, which is, you know, one, making a living from your own businesses and your own, you know, because before bass playing was paying the bills exclusively, I did other things to make money. I was pretty much always self-employed since, let me think about this. Even starting in my undergraduate years, you know, I was always doing something. When I was younger, for money, my dad wouldn't give me an allowance. He told me to get the lawnmower and find somebody who needs their lawn mowed. So yeah, that's one thing I got from my family for sure, is they put that like entrepreneurial thing in me at a young age. So I had that going on. And then when I was out of school for a couple years and like, you know, like maybe like a year or two out, and I was starting to work more, and some of my friends were seeing that, or I would go back to music schools to play for something, and I would talk to people who were like, you know, a first or second year undergrad. They would ask me like what I'm doing, and, oh, how'd you get that gig, and how are you doing this? And I was like, really? You're looking to me for advice? Like, I'm nothing. But at the end of the day, like, all those little questions and all those little inquiries are what got me thinking like, okay, I don't know everything, but you don't have to know everything.
Right.
I have some things figured out, and I'm happy to teach that to other people. You know, it's like the same kind of thinking, like, you don't need to go to Hal Robinson to learn how to play a C major scale, right? There's, you know, like, Hal could totally do that, like, and do a really great job. He's an amazing teacher with amazing students, but there's also a lot of other very qualified people who aren't at the top of the field who could do a really good job at teaching you that, you know? And I think that's all good. So I was thinking about in that kind of way, but as far as like some of the non-musical stuff you need to know to have a career and network and like pay your taxes and all that kind of stuff. Like, I definitely don't know everything. I still have a lot to learn, and I spend every day trying to learn something new about all that stuff. But there's certain things I do know that I can teach to other people. And the other thing that led me to do it was teaching lessons. Sometimes I would teach lessons to guys who were, you know, maybe towards the end of high school, who were like thinking about music school, and they got in touch with me because I was somebody who went through that a little bit more recently, rather than somebody who's, you know, in their 40s or 50s. You know, they wanted advice about, oh, well, like, that's actually how some of my first students came in, is they were interested in going to Rutgers, and they got in touch with me because they said, oh, well, you were just there. What's it like? You know? And a lot of times, like, we do the lessons, like we do the Samandal thing and like all the stuff that you have to do to get your chops together. But then they would get into like the career talk and, oh, how do you get this? And how do you meet people? And how'd you get that gig? And that's what got me sort of thinking about it. And then I tried to write something. Like, I guess it wasn't really a book. Like, the first couple attempts were like more like essay formats.
Sure. And
the first couple attempts, they just didn't go so well. I read what I wrote back to myself, and I was like, oh, this is garbage. And I just hit delete. So it took maybe 3 or 4 tries starting. Let's see. I maybe started working on it like mid 2015. Those were like the first couple attempts at something, or the first couple seeds where I took some kind of action to start doing it. The version that is out now happened maybe, I want to say, I started that process in like November of 2015, you know, and then had a draft I was happy with early in 2016. So that's early this year. Then I announced it, and then it got a really good reaction. I just put up a single post on Facebook, and it was like the most liked, most commented on thing I'd like ever put, right? So I was like, okay, this clearly has some kind of resonance with people. Let's really keep pushing on this and really polish it up. So that's what I did. I spent a lot of time editing it and going back and forth with other people and editors and like a graphic person to help me with the cover and like the stuff that I'm not so good at. And now it's out. I'm starting to get feedback from people, which is beautiful. But yeah, that's to answer your question. That's really how it started, was just going out, playing gigs, talking to people, seeing what their problems were and listening. And a couple people came back to me and said, "Hey, like that really helped, that thing that you told me." And when people came back and started saying that to me, whatever it was, whether it was like, "Oh, hey, this tax software really saved me a lot of time," or like, "Hey, this is how I got this gig. I got a lesson with this person and they hooked me up with it." And like some of those strategies, they worked for me, they worked for other people. And I said, okay, let's try and scale it up. And the book it seemed like the way to do that. So I went and did it.
Yeah.
It's the story.
It's great. It's like a lean, very clear read. Lots of, like, you use the term actionable steps. And I love that. It's very, I can tell you read a lot, but, or at least I'm assuming you read a lot, just like reading through it. Yeah. So it's cool. And you hit on all sorts of topics that I just think are so valuable. You talk about mindset and advice on networking and all that sort of thing. And one thing that'd be interesting to just hear a little bit about is developing resilience. Maybe I think you use that word, like failure and setbacks. Give folks some advice on that, or like maybe talk a little about what you mentioned in the book about failure, setbacks, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a big believer that if you're trying to do something, whether that's, something as far as learning an instrument or trying to do something in terms of like starting up a little hustle for yourself, make some money, if you're trying to meet new people in a city you've just moved to, whatever you're trying to do, one of the golden rules of all that is that if you get negative about it, you lose. Like, you can't get negative about stuff. On the other side, you have to be realistic. You can't be like delusionally positive. Like, sometimes there are problems that are very bad and you have to handle them. That's a definite reality. But in general, I think it's an important quality to cultivate in yourself, to just stay positive, because that's what's going to give you the energy to keep moving forward. Like, if you're feeling really negative and defeated about something, you're not going to have the pep in your step that you need to go out and pick up the phone to call the person you need to call, or to set up the YouTube channel, or to practice the bowing etude that's going to fix your bow arm. Any of this stuff that we do, as far as like freelancing or creative stuff, it takes an enormous amount of energy. So, staying positive, that's one of the things you need to do to keep your energy up. And when you get negative, it deflates. So, okay, when it comes to failures and setbacks, that can make you feel pretty awful. And that can deflate some of that positivity and take away some of your energy, which you need to keep moving forward, right? What I like to do is to look at failures as just another learning experience. Like, if something doesn't work out, that's okay. It's just, as long as you learn something from it. What you don't want to do is beat yourself up and use it as a judgment about who you are as a human being. Because I definitely used to do that to myself a lot and think like, oh, I'm not this kind of person, or I don't have this musical talent, or I don't have this, or I don't have that. And there's some innate quality in me that's going to hold me back from getting where I want to be. And, I think I've tried to do it both ways. I've gone that route. And then I've also gone the route of like, okay, I went and I didn't win this audition, or I played this thing and I didn't sound good. Like, am I going to let that be something that defines me, or am I going to let that be something that informs me? Right. And it's like going back to when I was a kid. Like, I remember one time I came home from school and I got like a bad grade on something, so I came home with like a D or an F on some quiz or some paper. Right. And I thought my dad was going to just totally ream me. Right. I thought I was in big trouble, and that's not what happened. He said, well, why did that happen? What was the problem? Right. And he came at it from that perspective of like, well, okay, so if you got an F on your paper, like, you're not stupid. Something clearly just, you didn't do something right. Like, let's just figure it out and then the problem's fixed. Then that won't be a problem anymore. So I've tried to apply that kind of thinking to as much of my career in music making as I possibly can. So like right out of grad school, I remember I took a bunch of regional orchestra auditions, did better on some than others. Didn't get a spot in any of these groups, right? I got some sub work out of the deal. Okay, that's cool. I met some people. So it wasn't a total loss. But at the end of the day, I wanted a spot in one of these little regional groups. Didn't happen. So that was one of those things where I said, okay, I could either use this to make a judgment about myself and be like, oh, I'm an awful bass player and, none of these groups. But then I was like, that's stupid. Like I get compliments from people on my playing pretty regularly. Like, again, not that I'm the best guy in the world, but like I don't sound bad. I know that much. So, okay, there's some value in that. What can I do? Maybe playing in a regional orchestra isn't in the cards for me for a good reason. Maybe that's not where my talents are going to be best deployed. But again, I see a lot of people who don't think about it like that. They beat themselves up and they're like, oh, I'm never going to do it. I must be bad. And I think that's a really unhealthy way to think about it. And it's the kind of thing that it'll totally demotivate you from wanting to make music. It's like, it can be brutal on some people, and like, with that kind of stuff, you just keeping the right mindset and keeping a positive attitude is so important. And like, if you talk to people or listen to your many podcasts about people who have won big auditions, they're all like that. That's one common thread I see with all of them is they play the auditions and they're like, okay, I didn't get this one. What's the problem? Like, what do I got to do? They see it as like a problem solving thing, not like, oh, I must be terrible. That's clearly what's happening here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's like solving a puzzle or just affirmation of your own, negative qualities or something like that. It's all about the mindset. It's just huge. I love the way that you phrased it very eloquently now, but also in the book too. It's just key. It's key for everything. And if you have that negative mindset, it just bleeds into everything, and it bleeds into your social interactions and that. And that's another thing that I love that you give some really good advice about like how to be on a gig and in terms of networking. You have a lot of great points just about networking in general, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, as far as like how to be on a gig, I mean, if I want to say it in the shortest way possible, just like be cool, man. Like don't. Yeah.
But that's hard advice to take. But that's what it is. It's like be a good dude.
Yeah, like I think it's important to have. You need to have boundaries because you don't want to get walked on, because there are definitely people out there who will take advantage of people who show up with a good attitude. But I think you also need to show up with a can-do attitude, right? There's like, it's never going to be perfect. There's always going to be some bumps in the road. So you got to just roll with it. Like, I'm sure you've seen it. I've seen it, like where people just, something little happens and somebody throws like a tantrum in front of a whole group. And then everybody's looking at them going like, oh my God, what are you doing? What are you doing? What, like, and they're just making a scene over, not like there are a couple times where I think that's maybe justified, but there's a lot of times where it really isn't. Or even when you interact with other people, like on breaks and stuff, I can't tell you how many times people like have talked down to other musicians, or they're, they say like mean things as if they're like above being at the gig that they're actually. Well, it's like, you're here. Why are you like? Don't put people down like that, And not to say like that's like been my general experience. Most people that I've worked with are wonderful and they're very pleasant to be around, but like, just like, don't be one of the cranky ones, Like, I'm not going to name names here, but I've played with a couple groups where like you get there and you're on the same stand as somebody who literally stopped practicing in the 70s.
Sure.
And it's like, why are you here? What do you like? This job doesn't pay big money by any means. Like, you could probably make a lot more doing something else. You're clearly not invested musically. You're just dialing that in. Like, why are you here? What are you doing? That's not like, don't be that guy. Don't just sit there and punch the clock. Like, if you're going to be there, be all the way in. Like, really do a good job. That's so important. And if you're not going to do a good job, then don't do it. Like, just go do something else with your time.
That's one of the sections of your book, actually.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's like if you're gonna do it, do it. If you're not gonna do it, then don't, because it's not gonna help you to do it halfway. That doesn't make you look good. So I mean, yeah, there's a lot of thing, like it's human interaction, so there's a lot that goes into it. It's obviously a complicated thing, but it's like, yeah, the first golden rule is like you have to show up and sound good.
Yeah.
That's like the first thing you have to do. The second one is like, don't piss people off. Like, don't say mean things. Don't talk down to people. I mean, some of it is even like, it's smaller stuff. Like if I'm playing on a stand with somebody and the other guy's like crowding the hell out of the stand, like, that's really annoying. Like,
yeah.
Like at least try to be a considerate neighbor. Like ask the person you're playing with, like, can you see? Do you have enough room? Like, just try to make sure that people around you are all cool and that you're putting people at ease and making them feel comfortable. Like I know I talk about punctuality in the book, right? Like there's a lot of people they're like chronically like last minute people. They're never technically late. So it's hard to call them out and say like, oh, you're late. So, but they're like chronically there at like the 30 seconds before the tuning A happens.
Yes. Yeah.
And that, like, even though you're technically on time, like, that puts people on edge because you're like, man, this guy cuts it close, like, all the time. Of course, we've all had that time where, like, something happens and, like, you're that guy. So if it happens once out of, 1,000, then people will give you the benefit of the doubt. But if you're always that person who shows up right at the last minute, that just doesn't look good. Like,
it doesn't look good. I don't know if you've had this experience, but I'm sure you have. Someone calls you up and you can't do a gig, so you're going to recommend people. And I go through, and I've been in the position where I'm just about to recommend a name, and then the image in my mind of that person just like walking in last second, every time I see him comes in, I'm like, and moving on. Even if you're not late. There was one, I played this gig and the basses were on the opposite side of the stage, and this guy would show up. It was probably 2 minutes before the gig, right? And he would have to like lift his bass up and like parting the seat. Go through. And I'm like, I think I never recommended him for anything after that, just because that's one of those cardinal rules.
Well, yeah, that's a good way to think about it. And how I try to think about it is just like ask yourself how you come across to other people. Like, be like, okay, like, are they going to feel comfortable recommending me for things based on what I'm doing? I think that's a really important way to frame things for yourself. Is like, okay, am I going to be like, is there anything people are going to worry about? Because I've been in the same situation where I have to recommend somebody. I need a sub or I can't make something and I'm trying to give them a few good names. And it's interesting the qualities that you start to judge people on as to whether or not you're going to give them, because you're sitting there, you're like, oh, well, this guy's really good, but he says weird things. I don't know how that's going to look like. Or like there's other people where I'm like, is this guy going to show up with the right suit? Like everything's fine, but like that might be an issue, or like, oh, this guy he's cool, but like his car never works. I don't know if that's going to be an issue. Like so actually recommending, like the criteria you go through to recommend someone for yourself, whether it's a sub or just because you can't make something, that's a really good list of things, the standards to hold yourself to.
Yeah, for sure.
Would I recommend me? If you know what I mean?
I know.
It helps to take a step out of yourself and think about it in those terms.
There's a guy I know, another person that I ceased recommending for gigs. I'll throw this in here real quick, but he would obsessively practice the Dittersdorf concerto, like every second that we weren't playing, and then even if like if the rehearsal's actually happening, you'd see him like, he'd
oh
be
my
like,
God.
like Dittersdorf, man, not on my list anymore.
There was one time I was on a gig and I had somebody. I walked in, it was somebody who I knew about. I had never played with this person. And this dude grabs my bass out of my hands, like without asking, right? I'm just sitting there like setting up, tuning, like he grabs my bass without asking, looks at it and he goes, oh yeah, I know about these basses. They're all right. Yeah. What concerto do you want to hear? And I was like, excuse me? Like, what? And then I was like, I forget what I said. I was like, Dittersdorf. I don't know why I said Dittersdorf, but so then he like goes and plays the Dittersdorf poorly on my instrument for me. And I was like, okay, great. Like, could I tune now? Like, yeah, and I'm sitting there thinking like, in what universe did he think this was a good idea? What are you thinking, dude? Oh my God. Like, to me, that, and to you, I'm sure that sounds like something like that you would never, ever in a million years think is a good idea. But there's people out there who, like, this happened. It happened in front of me. I will never forget it. So I think, maybe if you're like that far gone, I can't really save you. But, if you have a cup, that's like obviously a really extreme example. But I just think, I don't know, it's a good quality to have to audit yourself. Like, I know in my book, I mentioned James Clear, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think he has a wonderful blog as far as like working on your own psychology and working yourself. And he writes a lot about habits. That's kind of how I came to his blog. I was interested in learning about working on some of my own habits, because I think, your day-to-day habits that it's all you really have. That's what's going to get you from A to B, especially in some of this long-term stuff. So I'm reading James Clear, and one of the things I learned about through him is like there's a master habit, which is the habit of evaluating your habits. I think that's a really important one for everybody to work on and to think about, is from time to time just to step back and look at what you're doing and be like, okay, is this getting me closer to where I want to be, or is it not doing anything? Is it just sucking up time, or is it a negative thing? Like, I'll be the first one to admit, for a period of time, I was chronically late to everything. I was really, truly awful. And it's one of those things that once you get a reputation for being late, it really is hard to shake. You got to show up on time for like, I would say at least a year or two for people to be like, okay, he's different now. Like, So it's better to just never have that happen to begin with. That's one of the reasons why I put it in the book. But that's one of those things where I just had to take a step back and be like, okay, dude, you have, these couple bad habits that make you late to everything. So you got to just sit down and change them if you want to get where you want to get. Plain and simple. Like, nobody's going to do it for you. You have to just make it happen for yourself. And now I'm a lot better. Now I'm a pretty punctual guy most of the time. And that's how it's got to be. I got your Skype call at 1:00, and I was right here, ready to go, set up. You know what I mean? Like, so I think, but again, that was one of those things. I was like, I just had to take a step back from myself and be like, okay, dude, you really want to do this music thing? Like, this is a problem that you have to fix, and it's you just have to do it. There's no other way around it. But again, that's that like master habit thing of like taking a step back and being like, okay, this is how I'm spending my time every day. What is serving me and what isn't serving me? What do I need to put my time into that's going to be most effective?
Well, and I think I just discovered James Clear. My wife has been reading his writing for a while. And I think, if I remember right, one of the things he does is every few months or once a quarter or something like that, he like does like an online evaluation of all his habit, how he's making progress in all these different areas of his life, right? And it's good stuff. I mean, it's like he's into, lifting weights, writing consistently. Mm-hmm. It's good stuff. Who else besides James Clear? Maybe we talked about some of your musical influences. Maybe you have anybody else outside of the bass world that have really influenced you, writers or anybody like that?
Oh man, that's like a huge.
Yeah, I know.
That's such a huge topic. I mean, one guy that's similar to James Clear, and one of the guys that I check out for a lot of the same reasons is this dude Mark Manson.
Okay.
His website I think is markmanson.net. Really good website. It's kind of like James Clear with a potty mouth.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so, but like he definitely has his own voice. I think he has an article on there about why he won't ever clean up his potty mouth and like why it's part of his brand and all this stuff. He makes a pretty convincing argument for it. But he's another one. He has some really good things to say about like dissecting your own psychology for the sake of making you a more effective person and kind of confronting yourself and just like, like auditing your garbage, because we all have some things we do that are holding us back. And if you can make yourself more aware of them and work on them, then, your chances of moving forward are much higher. So he's another one. I'm trying to think. Like some of the other ones are dudes that you would probably know about. Like obviously huge Tim Ferriss fan, right? He's huge.
Well, and he's somebody else who refuses to clean up his potty mouth. Not that he's that bad with that, but he actually makes a very convincing case. But he's like a Long Island guy, and he'll just like drop a bunch of F-bombs if he thinks things are getting too safe on his.
I don't really care about any of that kind of stuff.
Neither do I. But
like Tim is one of those dudes that he like I read 4-Hour Workweek, which a lot of people like they like to talk down on that one because they're like, oh well, Tim doesn't work 4 hours and
no, but they don't get it. It's not about working 4 hours. It's about maximizing your time. Right?
Yeah. That's what I love about that book is it made me double down on some of the ideas that I'm talking about that I got from other places as far as like auditing yourself and being effective and with your time and all that. It was things that I sort of suspected, but then I read that book and I doubled down on them because he makes a really good case for it. And that book isn't about being lazy and only working 4 hours a week. It's more about, making yourself more effective with your time and really looking at how you're spending your days and saying, okay, is this working for me or is it not? And there's some other things where, I look at it and you can't really apply it to what we do as much. But the underlying message of time management, I think is huge. And it's something I really got a lot out of in that book. His podcast, I think, is even better because he just, he's had some awesome people on there. And that's one of my go-to podcasts when I have a long trip or something. I need to kill an hour. Like that's a wonderful one.
I think I've listened to a lot of those at least twice. Yeah, that's one of my that appears on my iPhone. That's the first thing I click.
Yeah. So yeah, Tim Ferriss's whole thing I think is really great. Like I said, there's certain things I could pick on or certain things that are harder to apply to like a freelance musician's life,
Right.
But okay, fine. So you eat the meat and spit out the bones, That's
yeah.
But so guys like that I think are cool. I think Gary Vaynerchuk is wonderful.
Sure. Yeah.
He's he has a great energy. Another Jersey boy, right? Maybe I'm biased.
Yeah. There's a bit of a similar energy. This is a compliment in your book and in like Gary's books too. He's just got a really positive energy. I think, and
that's what I love about him.
And
yeah,
just that hustle in the best sense of the word, right? He's just he's just a hustler in the best way you can be.
Yeah, I think, like I said, he has a really a good positive energy, but he's not like delusionally positive.
Right.
Right. He's I think he's realistic about a lot of things as well, which is awesome. But like both of those big time guys, both Gary Vaynerchuk and Tim Ferriss are, I think, two people that, I talk to musicians and they don't even know who those dudes are.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh man, you're missing out. They have so much good stuff and so much that you can apply to the music thing and how you run whatever it is you run, whether that's like a chamber group or or if you're like an administrator and you're in charge of like an orchestra or something. Like, oh my God, there's so much good stuff there. Both like practical, like do this, then that kind of advice, as well as like philosophical kinds of things as far as how you should treat people and what kind of culture you want in an organization. Amazing. So yeah, I'm hip to that kind of stuff. Both of those guys, like any resource they recommend, I'll at least check it out.
Yeah.
And they've, like especially Tim Ferriss, he puts out so much good stuff that points to somebody else's awesome work. I found out about so many other people who have been able to get something through that podcast. That's probably what makes it so great and why I keep coming back to it so much.
Well, it's been a huge influence on me too. And I mean, the whole podcasting, obviously doing this podcast, I'm a fan of podcasts, but just getting the chance to sit down and I think Tim uses the term, it's like a secondary, listening to podcasts can be a secondary activity. I think he uses something like that, which I love. I listen to podcasts when I'm, in the car, when I'm doing the dishes, when I'm working out, that sort of thing. And his podcast, you're like listening to him essentially talk with all these geniuses every week for like an hour or 2 or 3. And that cumulative effect of him and some other people I'm into, Joe Rogan, I've also I think that's had a huge positive impact on me and what I do.
Yeah. I mean, well then like if you want to totally spin the thing around, another recent Tim Ferriss guest, if you follow him, is Malcolm Gladwell, right?
Yep.
But what's interesting about Malcolm Gladwell is I forget which book he talks about it in, but he talks about, I think it might have been Blink, where he talks about how these genius, like world-class performer types are also, they can be really bad at explaining to other people how they do what they do.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think it also is important to approach that stuff with a hair of skepticism, to be like, okay, like, even though this person that is getting interviewed is obviously amazing at what they do, they might not have all the answers that you're looking for. So that's just something to balance it out, right? And that's why I'm a big person on, if you want to do something, like, just load yourself up. Don't check out 2 books if you want to learn about how to market yourself. Check out 30 books. Like, that's because I think everybody has their slants and their biases, and the only way you're going to get to some kind of truth that works out for yourself is to go through all of that and see what the common threads are, and then try some stuff, see what works with your talents.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I remember hearing this from Bert Turetsky. It's probably several people that said something like that.
Oh my God.
In terms of listening to listen to one recording, you're listening to one recording. Listen to 2 recordings, you're listening to 2 recordings. You listen to 3 recordings, you're doing research. And I think that's good advice.
Robert Black told me the exact same thing when I was in school. Like when I'm working on my cello suites or whatever, I would be like, well, I checked out this recording and I like this. And he's like, don't check out 2, check out 10. If you do 2, you're going to be tempted to copy stuff.
Right.
If you check out 10, now you're informed on some level, and you can come to your own decisions and be like, I want to do this because I like this. And
there's never been a better, in my old man rant, there's never been a better moment in time to do that. I remember I used to work at the Northwestern Listening Center, and people would come in, I'd put on the LPs for them and then the CDs and that sort of thing. And now it's like on my iPhone, I have access to essentially every recording available. And that's another one of my student comes in and what have you listened to Kusevitsky? Oh no, really?
Oh my God. Well, that's why I'm so glad that I'm just old enough to remember not having all this stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I remember the day we got a computer and the day we got internet.
Yeah.
And that was like, oh my God. Like, so like for a young guy, I'm like just old enough to remember when like getting a hold of a recording was like a major project. Like, you had to go to the record store and actually physically look for the disc, and then they didn't have it and they had to order it, and it was like this process.
Right.
Then you get it in the mail and you're like, oh my God, like here it is. And it was this gift that you would get. Whereas now it's just like, Spotify, whatever. I'll listen to this later.
But it's such a double-edged, but it's so, the positives to me it's so, I guess this is obvious, but they're so vast. Like, I can email a student a Spotify list of like, here are my favorite 5 recordings of this movie in a box.
It's good. Yeah. It's so good. I mean, it's amazing. And, every now and then though, like, not to hate on students too much, you get somebody who's like, they're like teaching you things and like, so that's like the other side of it,
Oh, for sure.
So you can give them your old man rant about, well, back in my day and all that, like, but then like, so for every one of those moments, you have another one where they show you some cool app, like I found an ear training app a couple days ago that's awesome, and I was like, oh man, this was so much harder to put together for myself even a couple years ago, and now it's $1, like. Awesome.
Right. No, I know. So we have a lot of people of all ages listen to this podcast, but a lot of high school students do listen to this. So and a lot of them are thinking about music school. So do you have any advice, general or specific? People, look, I know. Another
big
one of
topic.
those big topics.
Big topic. We'll go on.
No, but what give folks some recommendations as to how to maybe think about looking at colleges and thinking about like a career in music or possibilities of different careers in music. And again, I realize this is a wide topic, but
yeah, I mean, I think I had a pretty good, like, my undergrad was a little bit rocky in some ways, just because I came in and I was pretty behind things. So I had to really like bust my ass to get up to speed as far as like technique and all that. So it wasn't easy. I got kicked around a little bit, but at the end of the day, it did its job, right? It took me from being like down here and really put me forward. It really accelerated me. So I can't like but like that being said, like it was really expensive, you know,
right.
Cost a lot of money. so it's like I have some mixed feelings on it for sure. But I think one of the things I talk about in the book that I didn't get was I wasn't really given a choice about college. Even though I wanted to go to college for a thing that like my family didn't want me to go to college for, it was still like, hey, you have to go to this. This is a good idea. You would be stupid not to. And I don't really agree with that. I think because there's definitely people in the world that college isn't a good choice for. And that it might actually hold them back in some ways. So I think you should take a step back from that narrative that like you have to go to college because it's clearly the only way you're going to get ahead. I don't really subscribe to that because it's like if you can go to college and keep your financial situation pretty okay, you know, then it can be an advantage. But like seeing what some of these schools charge nowadays, it's like, if you're $250,000 in debt after 4 years of the thing, like that's a big gorilla to have hanging around your neck, man. Like, so first of all, I think let's take a step back and ask, why do you want to go to college? Like, how is this going to help you get to where you want to go? And don't expect the college to like mold you into a successful person. That's on you, right? College is just a tool to get there. Now, you know, college is cool because it teaches you a lot of, it's like, it teaches you the stuff that you don't know. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of stuff that's worth learning that you're not even aware of. College is a cool place to get turned on to a lot of that stuff. Some of the courses that I got the most out of were things that like, I didn't really know that much about them going in. Like I took a class on American popular culture. Right, and the history of American culture going back to P.T. Barnum, right?
Oh, yeah.
And when I did that, it taught me a lot about how contemporary culture works and how we arrived to how like American entertainment is right now. So that put a lot of things in context, you know. Another one that really influenced me was I needed a science class. So I took human sexuality. Amazing class because the teacher who taught the class, one of his things that he really wanted to hit on is he said, okay, you guys were fed a lot of stuff regarding your own bodies and your own biology that isn't true, you know, because people had like moral ideas in mind or they're trying to manipulate you for whatever reason, whether that's in your own interest or it isn't. And his whole angle was, I'm going to teach you about how the human body actually works. And just the guy went to medical school and he was really good about saying like, okay, you were probably taught this, which is right, but there's also this and that you might not have been taught, or like you were taught this, it's not right at all. Here's how things actually go. Like, so he was cool about that. And from taking that class, that's what made me start to question some other things a little bit more. That's what I really got out of it is like, okay, like just because a grown-up told you something doesn't mean that it's right. And I took that class early on where I was kind of starting to come out of my shell a little bit and become like a more independent person. And it's like when all that stuff was coming together, like I'm starting to pay my own bills and like get my own apartment and like do those kinds of things. So getting back to the question though, so that's cool. College can be a great thing, but make sure it's the right decision for you and that it fits into your game plan. Right? Like for me, like I wanted to get really good. Like college kind of made sense for that. The expense, it was expensive. It's starting to pay off, you know, but it's like, it was definitely like, it's like a long tail move, you know, it's not the kind of thing where, okay, you know, like I'm out of school for a year and now my debt's paid off and I'm not going to lie, I'm still paying for it. I'm not really upset about that because it's doing what I hoped it would do. So I think that's the first thing, you know, like some people take a year off before they go to college. I think that if you plan it and have some kind of a game plan, like I'm going to take a year off and use it to work and do this and accomplish these couple things. I think that's a really smart move. I think it's a really dumb move to take a year off and just be like, yeah, I'm going to see what happens, man. Like, don't do that. That's a very bad idea. I think you should have a plan if you're considering college. Because yeah, like I said, it's not mandatory. It's not for everybody, but it can be a really powerful tool. And I think that pushing people into college who aren't supposed to be there is like it's one of the things that fuels anti-intellectualism, which is a very dangerous thing. Because then you have all these people coming out of school saying, "Oh, it did nothing. It's pointless." But, and those are the people that I think they got kind of a raw deal. They were pushed into it when they shouldn't have been. And one of the things I wasn't given that kind of choice. I was told like and I talk about it in the book, like this is the only respectable option after high school. You go to college, right? That's just what you do.
And that's the message that's sent to young people. Having taught for 7 years in high school, that's presented as the only option. I've really come around myself. I did not take a year off, but I think that's a great thing. If you plan it right, and if you go to, whether it's going overseas for a year or whether it's doing something for a year, I don't think, and if we're talking about music and making a life in music, I don't think that's going to hold you back at all. It's only going to open doors.
Oh, I took a year off before I went to grad school.
Yeah.
And I completely agree with what you're saying. It absolutely, I took a year off. I studied with Linda McKnight and just worked.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to just have the year to practice. I had a plan.
Yeah.
And like you said, did it open doors? Absolutely. Did it make me more informed so that when I went into my master's program, I knew what I wanted to get out of it? Absolutely.
Something I love that you brought up in the book. So a student goes to college and then the real world starts. And that's the progression, right? Now, why? Maybe talk a little bit about the real world, or that concept.
Yeah. So, I just don't agree with thinking of it in those terms. Like there's like the college world and then there's the real world. No. Wrong. I think that the real world exists all the time. You're in it 100% of the time, I promise. Yeah. And it's just a matter of like when you want to start acknowledging that. So say you're the kind of person who, your family has the money to just put you through college and you can completely live in a bubble the whole time, right? You don't have to worry about paying rent or like buying food or any of that. Like you're just taken care of, right? If you think about yourself as like, oh, well, when I'm out in the real world, I'll do this. No, dude, like, that's just setting yourself behind a couple years, right? I think what you should do if you're in that position is look at it for what it is and be like, okay, I'm in an extremely fortunate position right now. How can I make this work for me, right? I have an advantage that a lot of other people don't have. What can I do? How can I make sure that this time doesn't get wasted? Because I'm sure, we've both seen it 100 times, if not more, if not 1,000 times. Like somebody who does have that advantage and they totally squander it. They just totally let it go. They spend 4 years watching Netflix in a dorm room and like not practicing, and then they wonder like why they're not where they want to be when they get out of school. Like, oh, it's because, dude, you had a huge leg up and you just let it sail right by you. Like that's what happened.
Well, and that's when we go back to those habits that you were talking about, James Clear, and yeah. So I think just see it like I look at myself, like I had some advantages that I'm lucky to have, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's some disadvantages I have. Like there was always like another kid who had like this thing that I wish I had or whatever. Right.
So okay, like I think it's silly to focus on that kind of stuff. Like, let me just focus on what I have to work with right now and ask, what can I do with that?
Yeah.
Right. Like, as far as like another reason why I did a book, right, is I'm looking for other entrepreneurial things I can do because that's just something I've always done. I mowed lawns. I moved boxes for people. I had a videography company for a little while before the bass stuff kicked up after grad school. Like, I just always had something cooking like that. And I'm sitting there thinking like, okay, like what's something I can start that doesn't require me to go out? Like the video thing, it worked out, but it required like a big investment of money to get that going.
Yeah.
It's like a good camera's expensive. You got microphones, right? All that kind of stuff. So I was like, what can I do that's not going to eat up like a huge chunk of money,
Yeah.
So I was like, well, a book it's a lot of time, but I'm lucky to have the time. I have that advantage right now, so let's put it to use on something. Getting back to the college thing, I think it's important to just focus on what you have to work with. Don't focus on what you don't have, because there's always going to be somebody who has more and who has some other stuff that you didn't get. And to just make yourself totally accountable for everything right now. And if you're in a position where you don't have to be as accountable as other people do, it would be stupid to just pretend like that doesn't exist. To pretend like, oh, well, it's all good, I'm taken care of. No, dude, like because the gravy train doesn't last forever. At least for most people. Maybe if you're like independently wealthy, then it's like, okay, do whatever you want. Don't listen to me. But if you're planning on having to work for a living and like make your way, like maybe you should start to think like that and hold yourself accountable right now for everything that's going on. And also to think a couple steps ahead for what's going to fall into your lap in a few years. Mm-hmm. If you're a sophomore in college or say you're a sophomore in high school, let's say, right? And you're looking forward to getting your driver's license, and mom and dad are going to help you buy a car and pay for your insurance and all that. Like, eventually that's going to be on you. You should probably think about how you're going to put that one together. Yeah. Lots of people don't do it though. That's why I felt it was an important point to stress, is just like, you're running the show, dude. That's one thing that, like talking about Gary Vaynerchuk, he talks about that all the time. That's like his favorite thing to do. Mm-hmm. Is like, no, dude, like you're at the wheel for your own life. It's yours. It's you don't get to point fingers at other people and say that like, oh, well, this person is why I can't right now. Like, no excuses, man. I think that's a very healthy attitude to have, is the no excuses thing.
It is, and it's a great concept. And I love the real world starts when you say it does, and that should probably be right this second. And I love writing a book. I wrote a book in like 2007, 2008, and like what an amazing experience just for like codifying your own thoughts and ideas. And I recommend it to anybody out there. Try to write a book. There's this, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, it talk about developing good habits. That's a good way to do it. In terms of books, okay, and so obviously we're recommending your book, which I think is great, and we'll have a link for that in the notes for this episode. Could you recommend a few other books like desert island books for a young musician? What books would change their life?
I could recommend many, but I'll try to keep the list short for just like some heavy hitters. The first one that I would recommend is, it's a good book to get in your brain early, and it's a book that you can come back to for a long time, and that's Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with that one?
I am. Yeah, through Tim Ferriss. Yeah,
through Tim Ferriss. Okay, so the first person who turned me on to that book was actually my grandfather when I was like in high school. Yeah, he was like really big on that one. And like I checked it out a little bit, and I was like, okay, this is interesting stuff. But it's one of those books that I came back to, and it's a very known book amongst like those kinds of people, like the types of people that Tim Ferriss would have on his podcast.
Yeah, Stoic philosophy. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Like I think it's one of Bill Clinton's favorite books, like a lot of amongst like leadership in government and business America. That's like a very known book. That's probably how my grandfather heard about it, was just through the business world, because he had a pretty interesting career as far as all that goes. But that's a great book because it gives you some perspective, and it gets really heavy as far as like just putting your whole life in perspective. Like he talks about, how you have your life, and then before it and after it, there are infinitely large blocks of eternity that are bigger than you could ever comprehend. Like stuff like that is like, oh my God, like I'm nothing, man. I'm not even a grain of sand. But what's great about that book is it doesn't get dark about that either. It says like, okay, like you have your life. It's a very small, very temporary thing. And you don't want to let all the garbage interfere with it more than it has to. And it's one of those things that helps you just keep a level head when adversity strikes. Right? When you're in those difficult circumstances, it helps you just like keep things in perspective. And it is one of those books that if you internalize what he says, it will make you more resilient,
Mm-hmm.
like that kind of thinking, I think, makes you resilient, as well as just like doing hard stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, like I definitely got a lot out of athletics and that kind of thing growing up. I think that's the reason why a lot of these mud runs, like the Tough Mudder, I think that's why they're popular now, right? Is because people who live pretty sheltered lives, right? They want to feel tougher and they want to feel more resilient. So they pay to go run in the mud.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
Like at the surface, I was like, why is this a thing? And then the more I thought about it, I was like, okay, I think I see what this is. This is a resilience building exercise.
Yeah.
So that they can go to work Monday morning and they know that they got all like dirty and scraped up and like it felt like they were about to die, you know? So then they get into work and they're like whatever stupid stuff falls in their email inbox, it's cool. I can handle it. It just keeps. And so anyway, Meditations is one of those books that talks about some philosophy to help you get that attitude of like, okay, whatever comes in, like we can do this. It's just problem solving. It'll be fine. Another book that I would highly recommend is Managing Oneself by Peter Drucker.
Okay.
Again, another one of those books that that like business sort of community. Well, I mean, Peter Drucker is like an intellectual, right? Who contributed a lot to like business leadership and business thought and how you run a modern corporation. But Managing Oneself is awesome because he gives a pretty robust process for just evaluating yourself and helping to find your strengths and your weaknesses. Like one of the things I love in that book is he talks about how people are really good at knowing what they're bad at, but they're not always as good at knowing where their talents are. And, you know, he gives a journaling process in that where he talks about how to find out what your talents are. Because a lot of the time, the stuff that you're good at is stuff that you tend to overlook because it's easy. Like earlier when I was talking about that Ableton conference in Berlin, like I totally experienced that effect, you know, because I go in there and I'm the only double bass player in there. Probably I didn't meet any other ones. And to me, it's like not a big deal. It's like, okay, it's like when you're at ISB and you're like, okay, I'm a bass player.
Right,
like,
yeah, exactly.
It doesn't feel special at all there because you're around over 1,000 bass players, right? But at Loop in Berlin, this Ableton conference, totally opposite. Like I would talk to these people who make music on laptops and with synthesizers all day, and they're like, "Wow, you can play an orchestral instrument? That's so cool!" And it seemed a lot more special to them. But again, for me, it put it in perspective. Like, okay, I live and breathe this every day, so it doesn't feel as special, you know. So Managing Oneself is the kind of book that gets you thinking about that. Like, what am I actually good at? You know, I mean, you've probably gathered this by now, but I'm a pretty chatty guy. I have a gregarious streak in me. That's not something I thought of as like a talent, right? Or like something that I'm good at because it's just how I am, right? But not everybody can do that, right? So that's one of those things that Managing Oneself helps lead you to, is seeing like, okay, maybe stuff that I took for granted is actually like a useful talent that I can put to work for me. And then the last book I would recommend is, what is it? There's a book, it's called The Art of Deception, which sounds a lot more nefarious than it actually is. I think there's another book I think it's about like computers or like cybersecurity. That's not the one I'm talking about. This one is by a guy named, it's by two people. It's by Nicholas Capaldi and Miles Smith.
Huh. Right? Interesting.
But so Art of Deception is good. And I would recommend it to somebody thinking about going to college or like any young adult really, because what it teaches you how to do is pick apart an argument. And the book isn't so much about manipulating or deceiving people, but how to know when somebody's trying to do that to you. So how to know when somebody's trying to manipulate you and how to evaluate information for yourself and how to really think critically about it, you know? Because like when I go back to the choice of college, whether that's a good idea or not, when I was 15 or when I was 17, I really didn't have the intellectual skills, like the stuff that they teach in that book, to evaluate that for myself. Mm-hmm. I was just like, okay, well, everybody around me who seems to have their act together is telling me this is a good idea, so I should probably do it. I didn't have like a balanced sort of argument, like this is probably why you should go, but also this is why it might be a bad idea. Like, I didn't get that. So Art of Deception is a great book. Just make sure you get the right version of it.
Okay. And I'll link up to all three of those for this. So folks can just look at the show notes and you can get that.
Word. Okay.
And you've got, first of all, I will also link up to your website, which is a beautiful website and
Thank
just
you.
presents you so well. And you also you've written a couple of posts about websites in general, like how to make a great website, and you have a 7 deadly sins post.
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
love that. I think one of the first images is this horrible Dave Matthews Band, right? It's like with the repeating. It's everything
Right.
like it's
Right.
like MySpace at its like evil apex,
brutal.
kind of thing. And that's still something. It's 2016, and it's amazing how many musicians don't have a website. But as I think you point out, like it could almost be worse to have one of those kind of websites than not even have anything at all. I don't know if you want to just share a couple of thoughts about what goes in, or what people should focus on putting together a website.
Yeah. So, as far as that end of what I do, like I'm a bass player at the end of I'm a bass player at the beginning and end of the day, I should say.
Yeah.
That's like the first thing, that I really do, and what everything else is based around. But as far as having a website, I think it's, something that you need to do nowadays, because people need to find out about you. Like I just did a gig at National Sawdust in Brooklyn, which is a wonderful venue for this. It was the New York City Electroacoustic Festival. Mm-hmm. And I asked them, I said, how did you find out about me? And one of the composers had just Googled for a bass player in New York who knew about electronic music, and they found me, right?
Wow.
Right? So I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. Like,
yeah.
And after that happened, I was like, okay, I think I have this website thing figured out enough that I could start to advise other people a little bit on how to do it. Because like you just said, it's a nice looking site. It seems to present myself well. So part of my presentation on my website, my web presence in general, is aside from just playing the bass and trying to do something that's musical and fun to listen to, I want to take what I've learned from that and help people solve some of their problems, mm-hmm. right? That's like a truly entrepreneurial kind of thing, right?
Right.
Rather than like there's freelancing and playing music and like recording stuff and distributing it and all that. But at the end of the day, like I think entrepreneurship is more about just finding problems that people have and helping them solve them. So if you want to see my music, if you want to learn about me, you can do that on the website. I've worked very hard to make sure it looks good and that it's reliable and all that stuff. But the concept behind my blog is more the entrepreneur thing, like how do I help people? How can I take what I know and what I've already done, the problems that I've already solved, and help other people to solve their problems, right? That's what my book is all about, right? It's like, okay, do I know everything? No, but I have gone through music school and I've managed to put together enough work to support myself. That's a problem for a lot of people, so let's teach other people how to fix it. And I'm going to teach you everything that I've learned that has worked for me. That's the whole concept behind the book. So for the website, I did these 2 articles. It's funny, actually, if you look at my earlier blog articles, you can actually still see the stuff that ultimately led to the book. Mm-hmm. Because I started, originally the purpose of my blog was, let me see if I have it in me to even do a book. Let me see can I write consistently? Can I do something that resonates with people? So that was the first, kind of the first thing. And if you look at my later posts, like the ones you're talking about, I've gotten better at it. I've learned a lot about how to do the blog thing. Like the headlines read better. Like the layouts make more sense. They're a little bit more web friendly. And I've spent a lot of time to learn how to do that end of it well. So basically, for musicians, I think you should have a website. But if you're going to have one, it needs to be good. Right. You can't I have this bass duo called Duo Radix with my buddy Dan Merriman, and he's like kind of the opposite me in a lot of ways, in that he's managed to find a lot of work and do pretty well for himself doing like the regional orchestra thing with like next to no web presence. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was like, dude, how do you do that? Like that's incredible. But like I think he had a website for a little bit and then he took it down or something. But yeah, he doesn't have a whole lot as far as that kind of stuff goes, because he agrees with what I'm saying. It's like, okay, I'm either going to do this and have it be really good, or not do it and wait until I can do it really well.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I think that's because I see so many musician websites that are just bad. Like, there's even a Tumblr that I found that was just a collection of bad musician websites, and some of them, like, they're really gnarly. But yeah, in 2016, there's so many, not free, because I've yet to find a free tool that's like really good.
Yeah.
But very low cost options to put together a really nice site. It'll take a little bit of work. It takes a little bit of money, not a ton. I do my website on Squarespace, which in that one of those articles that you mentioned, I kind of weigh some of the pros and cons of WordPress, which I used to use, and Squarespace, which I use now. Both very, very capable platforms to build a beautiful looking site on. But yeah, it's like if you're willing to learn a little bit or get a little bit of help from somebody who knows about computers, like, you can have a site that looks great, right? And I explain what you have to do to get that far, like how to set up a domain. You have to get some hosting. You have to pick a platform you're going to build the thing on, right? And then the other problem that I see a lot is sometimes people get that far. They make a site that's like, everything works. The layout is great. It's aesthetically pleasing. They have good pictures. The content's good. But then some of the other sections on their site, like, don't make sense. And I feel like they aren't thinking about how other people are going to look at it. Like, if you have one of my big pet peeves, right, is if you have a gig calendar, right, and it's empty, that doesn't look good.
Right.
Like, don't put that up there, know? Or the other one is the vanity calendar, where they have a web calendar up and there's a lot of dates on it, but it's all like, it's like private parties and stuff that you can't go to.
Yeah.
Or like gigs that are already very heavily advertised for, or like, sure. Or like maybe a gig that you don't want people to come to because you're just doing it to make a couple bucks, and it's like not going to be so great. Like, I see those a lot, and I'm like, dude, no. Like, you don't, and it's totally fine not to have a calendar.
Yeah.
It's really like nobody's going to be like, oh, what is this amateur do? If everything else is awesome, people aren't going to judge you for that, Or even if you go on like big people's websites, like big soloists and stuff, if they're not on tour, they just don't put up a calendar.
Right.
It's like, it's really not a crime. But so I think when you're going to have a website, like, it's got to look good. Like, your recordings have to be as good as you can possibly get them, and your pictures have to be good. Especially like if you don't have the money for a photographer, if you just go and read a couple articles about how to take nice pictures on an iPhone, like, they're really, like, you can get really good results. Photographers will complain, but that's kind of it. Like,
right.
Or on my old WordPress website, one thing that I did is I did another summer festival called the Pierre Monteux School for Conductors. I played in that orchestra, had a wonderful experience there. And that year they had a photographer come through to photograph the festival. So I just asked for a couple pictures, and they're like, yeah, here, take them. And then what was the other one? I did a festival in St. Louis where the same thing happened. A photographer was there. They were taking pictures. This wasn't a summer festival. This was something that one of my friends put together. It was called Eat, Drink, Listen. It was a food and music festival. Super cool. But yeah, same thing. Like, I was able to get good pictures for free. She said, yeah, you can use them. Just give me credit. So I did that. It was cool. That's what I used for a long time. So yeah, pictures have to be good. But then the actual layout of your website, like, it has to be functional. It has to make sense for people. And you have to think like, okay, if I'm somebody who's never heard of me, knows nothing about me, like, what are they going to think when they roll in here? That's the planning that has to go into a website. And like I said, the technical, like, how to get stuff to appear or how to move that picture over, never been easier. Totally possible.
Yeah, and Squarespace is a great recommendation for folks. And another thing you mentioned, I think, in the killer website is just having the ability to manage your own site, so you don't have to email somebody, or you've got old stuff up there from 2012, and that's just a really important thing. And so if you're having someone set up your site for you, that's really something that anybody should be able to offer you the option, whether it's through a WordPress site or through Squarespace. It's not hard. You can do it on your phone. You can update your
Well, that's the kind of thing where it's like, a lot of people hide behind, like, around the excuse of like, oh, well, I'm not a computer person. I'm not a technology person. So it doesn't make sense. You need to know a little bit for the exact reason you just talked about. Like, if you want to move a picture over by 10 pixels, like, it's a lot easier if you can just go and do it yourself right now on your phone, rather than, okay, I got to email the web developer and then he's got to invoice me. Then I have to send him $50 on PayPal and then I have to wait 2 days for him to do it. Oh, but then it wasn't exactly how it was supposed to be. So I got to send him another follow-up email, be like, oh, I said 10 pixels. I actually meant 15. Like, oh my God. It's so much easier if you know how to just do that little stuff. For like the heavy lifting, then yeah, maybe you need some help, but
sure. Yeah. And it's a different era now than it was back in the 90s. If people are listening, they haven't thought about websites in a while. In any of these systems, if you can send an email, you can get in and update the type of web content you'd want to be updating. I mean, with WordPress or whatever, it's not rocket science by any stretch of the imagination. These days.
Yeah, it's like if you're the kind of person who needs help getting it set up, like if WordPress or even Squarespace is like just not your thing, okay, then go get a web developer or get somebody who's good with computers and have them set it up for you, work with them to get it how you want, right? But then once that's done, make part of the agreement that they have to teach you how to use it.
Yeah.
Right. So that way, if you want to update your calendar, you know because really what you're saying is true. Like once it's all set up and the design is good, updating it isn't any harder than using email or word processing software. Mm-hmm. And everybody can do that. Like if you can figure out an Excel spreadsheet, like Squarespace is maintainable yourself.
If you can post on Facebook, you can update your website.
Yeah. So that's the kind of thing where like, in 2016, there's really very few excuses. Like I said, it takes a little bit of money to make it look good, but it's really not that much. Squarespace is it's what, $10 a month for the basic plan?
Yeah.
I was looking at another one called, there's a site called gospaces.com, mm-hmm. which is another, like if you just want like a simple single page website, you can do that with them. I think Squarespace will do it too, and it's, you can just have like a single landing page and it's cheaper. It's like $3 or $4 a month. Like we're really not talking about a lot of money, especially if it's something that leads to real work.
Right. And if you're going to spend money on business cards or a website these days, I can't tell you how many times I've bought these boxes of business cards for whatever job I've had, or they've been given to me and I've handed out maybe a grand total of 10 these days. We're just in a different era, and it's close to true, if not true. Like if you don't have a web presence, you kind of don't exist. Now, people my age, I'm still in that generation. I just turned 40, where most of the musicians I would work with wouldn't have much of a web presence. You would Google them and you wouldn't find them. Now you go 10, 15 years younger than me, it's kind of flipped the other way. But yeah, it's increasingly a requirement. So
yeah. I mean, and like I get that I'm a little bit more computer savvy than some people might be. Like I was always playing around with computers. I've had a website since college, even though sometimes it wasn't anything like really that interesting.
Yeah.
Or like when I was like a sophomore in college, I made the kind of the very ignorant decision that I was going to try to build a recording studio in my house, which financially was a complete failure. But I learned a lot, and one of the things I did was I built the recording computer that we used.
Oh, cool.
I learned so much from that. Oh my God. Right. So if you're like completely like afraid of technology, you just have no idea how any of that stuff works, just go like find your local nerd, ask them for a favor, buy them lunch, maybe pay them a couple bucks, whatever you got to do, find somebody who knows about these things, and just like at least get started with the website stuff if you haven't already. Because like we're saying, it's really not hard, especially once it's already set up. If you get somebody to set it up, you get a couple good pictures of yourself, you're in business, man. Like that's really all it is.
That's all it is. That's all it is.
Oh, thanks again, Emilio, for the great interview. And folks, check him out on his website, emilioguarino.com. And thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it so much. I appreciate you. And there are so many ways you could be spending your time right now. And it really is a thrill that you're spending time with me and with Emilio today, listening and learning about everything that's going on in the music world. Entrepreneur Week is what's going on right now. I hope you're enjoying it. Please check out the rest of the episodes. Visit our website for more information about what we're doing here, the mission of this podcast. And we will see you again soon for more life at the low end of the spectrum.